Now to the U.S., where, as you may have heard, the U.S. Senate has approved a $95 billion aid package for Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan. The overwhelming vote in favor marks the end of 6 months of deadlock in Congress. President Biden is expected to sign it into law today. It's a bipartisan victory for the president as he seeks re-election and a boost to allies who looked to Washington to support Kyiv. Mr. Biden, a Democrat, is expected to face Republican former President Donald Trump, a Ukraine aid skeptic, in the November election, and the White House has pressed lawmakers to approve more funding for Ukraine, which has been fighting a full-scale Russian invasion for more than 2 years. The 4 bills were combined into one package in the Senate, providing $61 billion for Ukraine, $26 billion for Israel, and just over $8 billion for Taiwan.
Escalated his war against Ukraine, I told our colleagues that allies and adversaries alike would pay very close attention to America's response. When Iran-backed terrorists invaded the Jewish state on October 7th to slaughter innocent Israelis, I warned that the world would watch closely for signs that American leadership was actually weakening. For months, our friends have watched to see whether America still had the strength that won the Cold War or the resolve that has underpinned peace and prosperity literally for decades. Our enemies have tested whether the arsenal of democracy is, in fact, built to endure. Well, tonight, the Senate will send a clear message.
What we're doing is a slap in the face to the Americans who sent us here to represent them. Instead of debating legislation to close the border and fix the economy, we're about to send billions of dollars to one of the most corrupt countries in the world. The war in Ukraine is a stalemate, has been for a while. Pouring more money into Ukraine coffers will only prolong the conflict and lead to more loss of life.
This national security bill is one of the most important measures Congress has passed in a very long time to protect America's security and the security of Western democracy. To our friends in Ukraine, America will soon deliver more ammunition and air defenses and basic supplies you need to resist Putin on the battlefield.
Well, for more on what that aid package will mean for Ukraine, I'm joined now on the line from Washington by the U.S. military analyst Doug Brooks. Doug, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and great to see you again. Just explain this funding deal for Ukraine to us and that figure of around $60 billion. What's it going to mean in practice in terms of military hardware? I understand it'll be in the form of mainly ammunition.
Well, yes, it's really important, and it's late, but better late than never. Ukraine has really been pushed hard by Russia, which of course is a much larger country with a much larger military. And Ukraine's been on the defensive, and it's running out of ammunition. So the breakdown of this $61 billion, the bulk of it is actually going towards air defense and artillery, ammunition, artillery shells, replacement parts, and so on, and then also infantry fighting vehicles. So it's stuff they need desperately, and we knew this vote was coming. The U.S. military has already prepared, I think, over $1 billion of equipment that will be going into Ukraine almost immediately, and then the rest will be coming later.
Well, I mean, $60 billion is a lot of money, but is it going to have an immediate, tangible impact, a sort of near-term effect on the battlefield?
It should have an immediate effect, because up till now, the Ukrainians have been watching their artillery. They've been reducing the amount of artillery they've been using because they're conserving their ammunition. They just don't know when the next ammunition will be coming in. They have a lot of equipment that needs to be repaired, and they're trying to preserve their resources because they just didn't know when this money was going to come through. And let me say that Europe has stepped up to the plate here, and Europe has been very active in terms of getting equipment and things to Ukraine. But this $60 billion is huge. And so this is going to make a big difference. Again, right now, Ukraine is on its back foot. It's facing a really daunting military. It's been losing ground. It's been making Russia pay for the ground that Russia is taking. But Ukraine is not winning this war at this moment.
Well, let me take you up on that, what you just said there regarding the war, and the fact that the Ukrainian military appears to be on the back foot. Can it be said that the Ukraine war effort is experiencing a slow death?
I don't know if I'd go that far, but it's definitely the Ukrainian military is exhausted. The units they have been in combat with very little rotation out of combat, and they've been taking heavy casualties. They've probably been causing 2 or 3 times as many casualties as they're taking, and we're seeing that because the Russian equipment seems to be getting older and older and older as they reach deeper to find old tanks they can still send into combat. But there are a lot of Russians and a lot of tanks, and Putin is really dead set on forcing Ukraine either to capitulate or at least to surrender a big chunk of its territory. And that would be, I think, unacceptable for Ukraine, but it should be unacceptable for the free world. This is really blatant, just a blatant land grab by Putin. And, it's quite likely, I mean, the belief is that if he does this and he's allowed to essentially grab a third of Ukraine, he's not going to stop. That Putin will, he's trying to recreate the old Soviet empire. So this is, I think, a very important point. The U.S. And Europe are combining now to really support Ukraine. And Ukraine hasn't asked for NATO troops or Western troops. It's doing the fighting on its own right now, but it's very grateful for this additional ammunition, the additional weapons, a lot of high-tech equipment that's going in. This is all very important.
But I mean, given your knowledge of what's going on in Ukraine, you mentioned earlier the Ukrainian army on the back foot and the challenge of trying to retain a measure of sort of success on the battlefield. I mean, do you agree with the strategy where Ukraine tries to take back all its territory, or should it be simply to take the war to Russia and give Moscow a reason to stop?
See, that's a really, really great question. What happens next? And I think a lot of this, the Ukrainians admit this too, depends on who's going to be the next president in the United States. I think Joe Biden has been very clear that Ukraine should have its territorial integrity and should keep the territory that it had before 2014. Trump has been more subservient, I guess, to Putin and saying that maybe the peace is worth trading some of Ukraine for. But Ukraine is a sovereign country; it gets to make these decisions. Right now, though, again, Ukraine is being pushed really hard. It's been losing a lot of people, partially because it doesn't have the ammunition that it needs, and it doesn't have the equipment that it needs. It needs to have maintenance done on this equipment. It needs all sorts of things that hopefully this $60 billion will help alleviate.
And this $60 billion, this funding boost, will it simply take Ukraine back to the status quo where it is still simply holding the line, or will it mean a step change to Ukraine's ability and enable them to start actually making gains against Russia?
That's a really, really good question. So last summer, Ukraine did try an offensive and it didn't go very far. It was not considered successful. And since then, it's been on the defensive again, just trading land for Russian lives. It's not clear that this will be enough for Ukraine to go on the offensive again. But think about it this way: there's a large political element on this. There is one person in Russia that is really driving this whole thing, and he has no successor. So right now, it's all really dependent on Putin and Putin holding Russia together, or the Russian Empire together. And if he's able to do that, he can continue to keep the pressure on Ukraine. But if Putin were to disappear, fall out of a window, or, God forbid, have some sort of health issue, there's really no one is sure what would happen in Russia and who would be in charge. And certainly any sort of focus they have on Ukraine would weaken. So it may just be a matter of the Ukrainians holding this line or trading it very, very slowly, trading land at a very costly rate to the Russians, and just waiting to see what happens to Putin. I mean, Putin has his own political enemies, his own issues that he's facing. And maybe the Ukrainians who have a democratic system, if Zelensky were to disappear, there's other people to take his place. Maybe it's just a case politically of Ukraine holding out.
And just finally, just in terms of the breakdown again of that money that's going to Ukraine, we understand that some of it will go directly to Ukraine. Some of it will be in the form of a loan, while a huge portion of it will go to the U.S. defense industry to ramp up production.
That's very true, and it's sort of nice being an American taxpayer in that sense. The vast majority will go to the U.S. and will essentially be buying weapons, new weapons, to replace weapons that we're sending to Ukraine. It's something that we do all the time. Essentially, you're constantly upgrading your tanks and your airplanes and your missiles. But what we're doing is sending the older stuff. We're sort of speeding up our replenishment of our own military and using the slightly older weapons, which are still better than the Russian ones. So we're sending slightly older weapons to Ukraine. So it's definitely ramping up our military industrial complex, if you want to put it that way. But the money is being spent in the U.S. And interestingly, in a lot of the states, Arizona, Ohio, and other places that politically are very important to both the Republicans and the Democrats. So I think this is one reason it has overwhelming support. I think Americans overwhelmingly do support Ukraine and the freedom and their independence. But certainly when you look at a bill this large of over $60 billion, it's very nice that a big chunk of that money will end up in the United States and will do a good thing in terms of supporting Ukraine.
Doug, great to see you again. Thank you ever so much. We're always the wiser from talking with you. Doug Brooks is a U.S. military analyst. He was talking to me there from Washington.